France have threatened Jersey quite a lot through cutting off energy supplies as a result of doing marine protected areas because it affects their fishing fleet. Yeah.
Okay. Is there fears then that when these MPAs come into play in September that this is going to have a knock-on effect?
Well, from the French perspective, they were consulted over the course of the whole marine spatial plan. So their views were, they submitted their views, and actually, there's a lot of negotiation on exactly where the boundaries should be, and Jersey had to compromise quite a lot.
Hello and welcome to the Ocean News Podcast and to another one of our Friday afternoon treats for you all, another special interview. I'm Rob Hutchins, Community Editor here at Oceanographic, and this Friday we are turning our attention to the relatively small island of Jersey. Because Jersey has just made history. The island has approved one of the most ambitious marine protection plans in the British Isles, nearly quadrupling the area of its seas protected from damaging fishing practices like dredging and trawling, and positioning itself well ahead of England in the race to meet international ocean protection targets. The newly agreed Marine Protected Area Network will cover nearly 22% of Jersey's waters from September this year, safeguarding some of the region's rarest and most ecologically important habitats. From kelp forests and seagrass meadows to maerl beds, extraordinary pink coral-like structures on the seabed that can host up to 173 species in a single square metre. It's a landmark moment years in the making, and one that places Jersey at the forefront of ocean conservation across the British Isles. So to talk us through what's been achieved, what it means for Jersey's seas, and what comes next, I was recently joined by Freddie Watson, Channel Islands Project Manager for Blue Marine Foundation, one of the key organisations that has been working towards this outcome. Talk us through sort of the headline of this story. So Blue Marine have been working on this project for quite some time, right?
Yeah, we've been somewhat involved since about 2018 through supporting research, in particular PhD, to understand how Jersey's existing protected areas are, or how they're working. But really, we've had boots on the ground in Jersey since 2021. So yeah, we've been involved for a while, and yeah, I guess the headline is that back on earlier last month in March, Jersey government approved legislation to protect in total about 23.6% of their waters. 21.7% of that number will be coming into effect in September this year, and the remaining 1.9% will be coming into effect in January the 1st, 2030. So yeah, that's the headline. It's a big deal.
Yeah, it's awesome, and I should have said, but congratulations on the part that you've played in getting that across the line, but also that Blue Marine have done, and the big job that they've put behind that in bringing that to fruition. So what are the environments that we're looking at then when we're talking about these protected areas? What is the wildlife? What are those habitats that we're protecting?
Yeah, well, Jersey sits at this confluence of different marine currents in the English Channel, kind of all these different weather systems. So it's quite a dynamic place. We have one of the largest pods of bottlenose dolphins visiting our waters, about a pod of 350 dolphins. We have extensive seagrass meadows and maerl beds. These protected areas were aiming to protect kind of the key fragile, sensitive and important habitats. And these habitats, 3 of them are SPA listed habitats, which is a kind of international treaty that means that Jersey has to legally protect some of these habitats. And these habitats are kelp, seagrass and maerl. Hopefully most people know what kelp is. Same with seagrass. They're both incredible for biodiversity. They support so much marine life. They act as breeding, feeding and nursery grounds for all these different species in sediment. Now maerl is probably our favourite habitat because it has the highest levels of biodiversity. It's pink, which looks great. It does also have a role in the carbon system as well, and that's what we're also trying to figure that out at the moment. But one of the issues with maerl is that it's incredibly sensitive and very slow growing. It's made of calcium carbonate, so it's like this calcium carbonate encrusted algae, so it's like a cold water coral. It photosynthesizes, so it needs the sun to grow as well as all the right kind of nutrients in the water for it to kind of do that chemical process to create that calcium carbonate shell. And so this whole process of growing takes like, to grow 1 millimeter can take a year.
Whoa.
Sometimes it's less than a millimeter in a year.
Yeah.
It depends on the conditions. And because it's calcium carbonate, it's very brittle. So, you could, if you were to just put your hand on it, you could easily break off some of its metal. And currently, we have like 60 square kilometers of metal beds. And
That sounds like a lot.
it's a fair amount. Yeah,
Yeah.
especially for our waters. And
Yeah.
some of those metal beds are in better condition than others. But the issue is that of that 60 square kilometers, only about 13% of our metal beds are currently protected from bottom-towed fishing gears like dredging and trawling. And those are kind of particular activities which will have an incredible amount of damage to those habitats. So the aim is, I guess the whole idea of these MPAs is to protect these sensitive habitats from those more damaging activities like dredging and trawling.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was the whole aim of them, basically.
Yeah. No, incredible. My knowledge of maerl is quite very minuscule. But to talk to what sort of habitat they're providing then, so what sort of wildlife would we typically see around a maerl sort of habitat?
So the main one, at least for us in the kind of northeastern Atlantic region, is scallops. So in terms of species that we're familiar with, maerl beds are brilliant at hosting baby juvenile scallops. So that's where scallops, when scallops breed, they kind of shoot it's called spat. So they shoot their spat, and that is basically there's thousands, I don't know, hundreds of thousands maybe, probably more like tens of thousands of baby scallops out into the water column, and they settle in these maerl beds. Once the current drops, they can settle, and the maerl beds, they grow in all these kind of intricate kind of twiglet-like structures, which means that all these tiny organisms can get caught up in those little crevices. And that's why we find so many scallops in these maerl beds, along with lots of other tiny microorganisms or juvenile species. So we tend to find lots of scallops in there, so they can kind of indicate healthy maerl beds too. And also scallops are one of the more important fisheries in Jersey, but also the whole kind of northeast Atlantic region. Scallops are a huge fishery for France, for the UK, and for Jersey too. So it's important that our scallop stocks remain healthy, and we need these maerl beds to kind of support our fishery, basically.
Yeah, my brain is already firing with like 1,000 questions to ask you. My synapses are tingling, and about sort of the destructive fishing that we've seen and how that's impacting the scallops, and how we've seen actually recent reports come out about the bottom trawling is now undermining food security, and this is contrary to the industry sort of main argument that we need bottom trawling. But actually, we're finding that it's undermining that food security. But actually, to stay with maerl for a little bit longer, is there any sort of historic evidence as to what level of destruction has been caused to these habitats over a set number of decades?
Yes, to an extent. We don't have data sets of the health of our maerl beds, going back decades. We have some, but not a lot. I think most of the research on the health of these maerl beds kind of goes back over 10 years, maybe, probably about 15 years was when, maybe a little bit longer, but in depth, there's our existing marine protected areas on our offshore reefs were designated mainly because of the maerl bed, the presence of maerl beds and their health. And what happened was that in order to have those areas protected, which were mainly being protected from maerl, there were some local scientists in Jersey who they were doing surveys of the maerl beds and collecting data on their health, their kind of extent, things like that, and kind of the species that you might find in it, just to prove how great of a habitat it is. And then, just by chance, a big French trawler went through and over that maerl bed as they were leaving the site. So they went back to the exact same location like a few days later or the next day.
Yeah.
And they could see the marks on it, and it was just totally obliterated. So it was just by chance that they could have that before and after snapshot, which was enough evidence for the government to then take to the table. And at the table back then, this was pre-Brexit, so we had our own fishing agreement between France. So we had Brittany fisheries and Normandy fisheries in Jersey. And if we ever wanted to get something through in terms of fisheries management, it was quite difficult because it was usually a 2v1, Jersey being the one. But this evidence was so strong, it was irrefutable. So that's probably the best case I can think of in terms of the health of our marl beds. But ideally you want a thriving, thick, healthy marl bed. But even if you have a dead marl bed, it's still better than nothing.
No marl bed.
And this is really interesting. So when the Jersey government were doing the methodologies of kind of assessing the health of marl beds and saying, okay, well, how much marl do we need in order to protect it? What they did is that they followed the methodology of 20% live or dead. So in 1 square meter, if 20% of that square meter is covered in marl, they can protect it. But usually the marl, it has to be 20% live. And this time it was 20% live or dead, which was really interesting. So if there was 20% coverage of marl, but it was all dead, they could still protect it because the scientific evidence proves that even a dead marl beds still have benefit to marine biodiversity.
Wow.
Which was really interesting because I don't think that's been done in a lot of places. I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure most places go by 20% live.
Yeah. But that seems like a definite cognitive gear shift in an approach or an awareness of the importance then of these habitats and from a political side, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean we've seen in Oceans with David Attenborough that the oceans can come back to life. They can restore themselves. They just need that helping hand, and this is what the helping hand is. We do a lot of the marl beds in Jersey that have been protected are damaged. They're not in the best condition. There are some which are very pristine, but a lot of them have been dredged for the last 60, 70 years. So we are aware that this activity is still happening because these MPAs aren't coming into effect until September, so there's still 5-6 months worth of activity happening on them. But in the grand scheme of things, that's 5-6 months in a 60-year period. So it's a shame that they're still being damaged up until September. But the bigger picture is to get them secured, and they'll be secured hopefully for the rest of time.
Okay, so this might be a tricky question in terms of the consensus or working with those fishers to build that consensus. How did that process go then? If what is going to be protected in September is still at the moment being dredged over, is there that community consensus? And then when that enforcement comes in, or when the protection comes in, are you confident that the enforcement's going to be there?
Yes. I mean, so two questions there. France have threatened Jersey quite a lot through cutting off energy supplies as a result of doing marine protected areas because it affects their fishing fleet. Yeah.
Okay. Is there fears then that when these MPAs come into play in September that this is going to have a knock-on effect?
Well, from the French perspective, they were consulted over the course of the whole marine spatial plan. So their views were, they submitted their views, and actually, there's a lot of negotiation on exactly where the boundaries should be, and Jersey had to compromise quite a lot. If you look at the first draft of the marine protected area boundaries at 27%, it's been, over the years, it's been whittled down to 21.7%. And that is largely as a result of finding a compromise with the local fleet as well, but also with the French fishing fleet. So, to be honest, I don't really think they have a leg to stand on. Jersey has followed this process by the book. The evidence is sound. Their reasoning is perfect. They couldn't have done it any better. So, I think from a legality, looking at it from a legal lens, Jersey is absolutely fine. But yeah, I mean, when they come into force, when the marine protected areas come into force in September, yeah, I probably expect to see some sort of backlash from in French media. So we'll keep an eye on that. But ultimately, these marine, I think we might see in the short term backlash, but in the long term, we'll start seeing our fisheries recover. And there's no physical boundaries in the marine environment apart from coastlines, and where our marine protected areas are, there's going to be a huge amount of spillover effect into the French area, which they can then benefit from. And also these French vessels also fish in our territorial waters too. So, I think we might see that short-term backlash or protesting. I'm not too sure what's going to happen, but hopefully it doesn't scupper any plans for marine protected areas and management of them. So community consensus. Back in 2022, we polled the island. We had about 5,000 people respond of the population, which is 100,000 people. So a really good representation of the island, as polling is concerned. 80% of people were in favour of marine protected areas that are close to bottom trawling, and not that we want to completely close off bottom trawling to the entirety of Jersey's waters. We did ask that question, and 90% of the people said, yes, we'd like to see bottom trawling completely banned from the water. Wow. So it just goes to show kind of what the community think about it. But building the consensus with the fishermen is, that I spent a fair bit of time going down to the harbour sides to try and speak with the fishermen, back when I first started in 2021. And it was tricky because the fishing industry is a small community. The island is a small community. Everyone is friends with each other. Everyone cares about one another. That's the nice thing about being from Jersey. It's a close-knit community. But when you're coming in and kind of disrupting the whole thing and saying, we really want to see marine protected areas. Yeah. And the effect of that is going to directly impact some of the fishing industry. It's a really difficult conversation to have. But luckily, the way Jersey's fishery is set up, it's predominantly a crab and lobster fishery.
Right.
So the majority of fishing boats use static fishing gears, and these marine protected areas only protect against mobile fishing gears, which is dredging and trawling. So the majority of the fleet, which use pots, lobster pots, static nets like gill nets, rod and line fishing, and scallop diving, spear fishing, things like that. That can all still happen in these MPAs, and I think this is kind of, at least this is the type of MPA that's the right fit for Jersey, because it still allows, they act as a safe haven, not just for biodiversity and for tackling the climate crisis, but also acts as a safe haven for low impact sustainable fisheries. And I think that was really key, is the type of MPA that it is, to get kind of consensus or support, at least some support from the fishing industry and the community. Yeah. And then from the enforcement side of things, all Jersey registered, all Jersey commercial fishing vessels now have something called IVMS, which is like a vessel monitoring system. And it's not public data, so you and I can't see where these fishermen are fishing, but the data is being tracked by the government, and the government can also geofence. They can create a ring around where the marine protected areas are, so that if, say, for instance, a dredging boat is going at a speed of less than 5 knots inside a marine protected area, it sends them an alert and they can go check it out. So the enforcement side seems to be pretty covered. I'm confident that it will be enforced well. And hopefully, there's also an element of self-enforcement within the fleet. Yeah.
That's really fascinating. And again, you've just given me like a launch pad for 1,000 different questions. So I'm going to try and rein it in and ask you one that, when you were talking about this is the kind of MPA that works for Jersey, I found that really interesting, and actually would love to talk about how do we take what's going on in Jersey, then extrapolate that or transfer that to the UK. What can we learn from what's being done here and take that to where we need to maybe a little bit more action and input?
Yeah, it's a really good question. The lucky thing about Jersey is that it's self-governing, completely self-governing. It can create its own legislation. It has its own state assembly where they debate legislation and pass it. So they can be, with certain things, they can be very active and responsive. So they can move fast if they want. And if we're looking at marine protected areas, the whole kind of process started it really was the marine spatial planning process that started in like 2022, towards the end of 2022. So it's not been, it's been about 4 years for this to come to fruition, which is fast in terms of designating marine protected areas. The thing that worked well in Jersey is that right from the start, they were clear about what a marine protected area means.
Right.
Marine protected area in Jersey means that you can't use any mobile fishing gear, so you can't dredge or trawl in that area. So that's clear. Jersey already has some marine protected areas that cover 6.5% of our waters, and officially in legislation they were labelled as, or they were written down as no mobile gear zones. It's very clear. And so 100% of Jersey's marine protected areas you can't dredge or trawl in them, and that's been very clear right from the start. And I think what's happened in the UK is that they've kind of done it the other way around. A lot of marine protected areas were designated, even a couple decades ago, and a lot more recently. And they were designated, but they didn't have the legislation behind them to prohibit certain damaging activities like dredging and trawling. So the UK has designated but not legislated and managed. So that's the issue. Now the UK is facing this, the government is facing this, they're saying it's a very difficult job of removing damaging fishing practices like trawling and dredging, from removing trawling and dredging from their marine protected areas. Because for the last 10, 15, 20 years,
just let it.
They've been these fishermen. It's not the fishermen's fault; it's the government's fault. The fishermen have been allowed to fish in these areas for 20 years.
Yes, of course they're going to.
And if once you try and remove that, it's going to be so difficult to do. So, I think that's been the slight downfall from the UK's approach is designating without having the right legislation come in right at the start, or the clarity that marine protected areas will ban bottom-towed fishing practices right from the start.
Yeah. It's so interesting. And actually, another thing that you mentioned just now is that community consensus and that poll of the residents, and 90% was it, or 80% were against bottom trawling.
It was 90% of respondents were want to see a complete ban on bottom trawling.
Ban on bottom trawling. And that's in Jersey. But obviously Jersey has this culture that it feels like, from what you're saying, has this deep connection, or at least this awareness of, it's an island and it's got this connection to the ocean. It feels like it's, entrenched in that community. If we look at the UK, theoretically it's an island nation, yet it feels like perhaps that awareness level is of similar proportion, I guess, to the, when you look at the size of the population in comparison. But do you have any sense of what the general, even anecdotal sort of feeling of connection to protecting our ocean spaces over here is, like, in the general public, that awareness?
I don't know. I think there's certainly been an increase in awareness. We've seen with the likes of Oceans with David Attenborough, that has done wonders for community awareness around the country, around the world, on the effects of damaging fishing practices, but also how the importance of our oceans, and also provides hope that we can still save the oceans. So I think that has been fundamental. And I think for instance, for us at Blue Marine, 5 years ago, there were 20 to 25 employees, and now we're a team of around 60, a little bit more. And And we're just one example of an NGO that's growing. There's plenty of NGOs out there that are also growing, that are helping and contributing to the space of increasing community awareness, and I guess fostering that appreciation for the ocean. So it's definitely not where, I think awareness of the marine environment around the country isn't where we want it to be, but it's definitely moving in the right direction, if that makes sense. I think sustainability is the term sustainability is just thrown around so much, and I think kind of that process of throwing it around so much has meant that people are now aware of it a bit more. Funnily enough, so I think that's also helped. You have people making more kind of ethical food choices, people around coastal communities trying to buy direct from fishermen rather than from fish on supermarket shelves. So I think all these little things are just contributing to that awareness and that appreciation, and I guess the want to do good for the world. I guess.
I like it. Yeah. That's quite positive. You could get so bogged down or mired in this there's a lot of negative noise all the time. It's about finding those little moments of positivity, and the Jersey development is definitely one of them.
What does give me hope? Firstly, knowing and seeing that the ocean can bounce back, that gives me a lot of hope. I think seeing the local communities really value the marine environment and really want to do good gives me hope. And I think even seeing, we rely a lot on funding from various different companies and organizations, corporations, whatever. What gives me hope is that we're seeing more money and funding going into the marine environment space, marine conservation space. Nowhere near as much as needed, but certainly more than in previous years.